I'm Mike,
And I'm Amber. Welcome to the Covenant Chronicles,
where we tell you the truth about relationships.
giving you the tools to build the foundation you always needed. Welcome back to the Covenant Chronicles.
Hola. So, had to get off my phone here. I was told to put it down. But that being said, I wanted to talk about this because I saw this video the other day and I sent it to you, and it was talking about first date questions. And it was an interview between two people, and basically it was something along the lines of if you're on a date, ask, the other person what they learned from their previous relationship. And if they go into this whole thing about, everything that their ex did wrong and how their ex is a horrible person and all this sort of stuff, like that's an issue. You should probably get out of there. Right. And then they made a point about, you can use the same logic on like a job interview, if you ask potential employees that, what they learned from their previous job. And if they go into like talking crap about their previous employer, blah, 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 like probably shouldn't hire that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk about that because it goes into a massive part. Excuse me, I'm currently sick, so we're doing this a little, hard to breathe, freaking trying to cough up a lung over here. Anyways, it goes into this realm of mindset, right? And, every relationship that you're in, a massive piece to that puzzle is mindset. And if you're not learning, and by learning, I don't mean, I learned what a narcissist is kind of bullcrap, right? Because like that's like this societal, we're just going to put labels on everything. And, everybody uses that as a scapegoat instead of like actually doing what they should in a relationship. But if you're not learning something from past relationships, so you can't reflect back, because we'd done this podcast before. We talked about healing while in a relationship from your past. And, there was kind of this like trying to explain, hey, like if you're in this place, maybe you're not ready, but hey, there's a level of this that you have to do with another person.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And this key factor right here, this marker, if you will, I think is a big piece to the puzzle of like, should you actually be in another relationship? And that's this question, right? Like, what did you learn from your previous relationship? And if you instantly go into like defense and want to talk about how crummy your previous partner is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that you're not going to have feelings and emotions. And you obviously left the relationship or aren't in the relationship for a reason,
Yeah.
right? And you're going to have things of like, well, they were this person and that's not who I wanted to be with. But if your response to that question is like immediate defense, they're such a crappy person, I didn't, like they're like the most horrible person ever type thing, you're probably not ready for another relationship. And if you're actively in a relationship and they were to ask you about your exes and that's the like response that you give, you should probably really examine like how much work you need to do on yourself, and the fact that that should be your primary focus. Because like if you're still in that heightened emotional, their peak emotional experience, heightened emotional experience by somebody like just asking you what you learned, and you can't actually sit down and say, well, this, that, and the other, I learned, this was a way that I communicated in the past, or this is a way, we've communicated in the past, or me and my previous partners have communicated. And I realized that that's not, effective communication, and this is a much better way, or, whatever it is. Communication's a big thing, connection, intimacy. Like, you can talk about any of the main topics in a relationship, but if you can't actually analyze how you learned and grew in those areas relationally from a previous relationship, you should probably really examine the work you need to do on yourself
Mhm.
before you continue just trucking along, either looking for a relationship or in the relationship you're in, and really spend some time focusing on internal growth.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a big indicator of where a person is at within themselves, right?
Hmm.
Because I think we know people who are in relationships now or married and still will not give a response of, oh, I learned this from my previous relationship. It would be, oh, well, they did this and they did this and they did this and they did that. And none of it was my fault and it was all their fault. And,
Hmm.
it's a pretty good indicator of, yeah, you probably really should be working on yourself.
Hmm.
Because I think both of us obviously can say like there was issues in our previous marriages, but I can look back and name so many things that I learned from it and can reflect on now and be like, this is probably why things didn't work out
Hmm.
because I did this and I, wasn't great in this area and I went into it in the wrong mindset to begin with, like I can list a million things personally that I did wrong
Hmm.
that contributed to the way that our relationship went. And that's not to say there's not things that he didn't do also, but like I think it's important to be able to identify you where you had mistakes and then also what you learned from those. Like,
Hmm.
what are you going to do in your current relationship to not have those same things happen? But that also, like, man, that can play such an issue in current relationships too, because if you're so still hung up on the past, on what someone else did to you, and all of the things that they did wrong, like, what are you carrying into your day to day with your current partner?
Well, and I think it goes to a deeper thing of like that victim mentality, right?
Yeah.
Because we talk about this a lot, especially like in my men's group, right? And there's nowhere in the Bible where it tells you to be a victim,
Yeah.
right? Like, the entire Bible front to back is quite literally the opposite of that. And so, which, we've talked about too, about a lot of our issues with like modern churches, because most of them teach this victim mindset, which is not biblical, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that is the same within relationships, right? Of like, it goes into a deeper issue of like, if that's how you're thinking about your past relationship, then you still have a victim mindset and you're going to do the same thing in your current relationship.
Hmm.
Right. And so instead of having ownership and saying, okay, well, this situation happened, and you hear it all the time from, men and women both, of like, oh, they're doing this and that's just like my ex, or whatever. And I'm like, if you're comparing your current partner to your ex, like, that's a whole issue in itself, right?
We've
Like,
done that though, and we had to have the conversation about how
correct.
we're not going to do that ever.
Correct. And that's where, like, eh, even for example, you still actively deal with a lot of the behaviors in the co-parenting side that led you to leave your previous marriage, right? But even with that being said, when one of us exhibits a behavior that is somewhat, I guess, triggering, or you could say that will bring up past things and say, well, and it trips that little thing in the back of your mind saying, hey, I've been here, I've done this before. Our conversations are not stop acting like my ex,
Yeah.
right? The conversations are, hey, like I've been through this before. I don't want to go through this again. So let's figure this out together,
Yeah.
right? Which is a very different thing. It's a very different conversation. And like you said, like we've done that. We've made that mistake before. And that's where we can say, like, hey, if you're still doing this, you need to fix this because this is a problem, right? Because we had to do that. We
Yeah.
had to take a step back and say, okay, in part of the boundaries and the rules that we've set forth in our relationship, right? Because, when people talk about boundaries, it's not just, hey, you can't, go sleep with another person, or you shouldn't be doing X, Y, and Z with another person of the opposite sex, right? The boundaries are also in your communication and what you're willing to accept or not accept, right?
Yeah.
The yelling, like, we don't yell at each other.
Yeah.
Do we have heightened emotions from time to time? Sure. Does our auditory level raise? Yes. But my auditory level goes up and down in this conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's not, that is what, when I say it raises, that's what we experience, which is very different than we've had in our past relationships, right? But the point in that is we've drawn a boundary. We're not going to yell at each other. And if either of us starts to go that direction, the other one immediately says, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
We're going to walk away from this situation and come back when both of us have cooler heads, right? And it's gotten to a point now that we don't even go anywhere near that zone because we've set that boundary and enforced it for so long. But that being said, those boundaries, right? Boundaries of like, hey, we're not going to compare each other to our exes and say, okay, you're doing this that they did. You're doing this that they did, kind of thing. And creating this like comparison. Well, with that, we've also practiced that long enough to where, once again, we don't go anywhere near that subject.
Yeah.
But even now, where I was going with that is with your situation. Even if, there's something that happens that's similar, the conversation between us is, hey, I've been through this. I don't like this. I don't want to live this again. Let's work together to find a solution and not, and this is where like a lot of the boundaries have come in our relationship. And I think that's an important thing to know is that, and I believe the reason why it was said in a manner of, hey, you can use this in job interviews too, right? Is back to the same situation, right? Because whether you're hiring somebody or whether you're, interviewing somebody for a relationship, as funny as that sounds, because that's what a lot of those first few dates are, right? You might
Yeah.
not want to call it that because that sounds too formal, but let's be honest, you're playing 20 questions while you're eating dinner or while you're, bowling or at the movies or whatever you're doing, right? And if that's what you're doing, then the question becomes, are they stepping into this with a victim mindset? Because if they are, and they can't have ownership for the crap that they do or for their role in a relationship, that's going to create a huge problem.
Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is you still see, like, you can look at relationships where people have been together for years potentially. And if they're still going, my ex is a horrible person, right? And you see
Yeah.
this a lot with co parenting. your relationship is not great,
Yeah.
right? Now, you can have a situation say, well, look, like this person is X, Y, and Z because they're actively continuing to exhibit this behavior, right? But there's a fine line between that and you're a victim and,
Yeah.
right?
Well, even in current situation, like the conversation is usually like, yes, this is happening, but I hope that in the future, like, this is going to resolve. This person is going to, get to a better place themselves. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not me victimizing the situation all the time and I'm the victim in all of this, like, truly hope that, like, they're able to heal themselves as well. But I think, another good, maybe it's a question people ask, I don't know, but like, would you go and change things or would you change your past,
Mm-hmm.
I think that's another good, like, green flag, red flag question because I think, um, my answer to it would be like, yeah, I had a lot of like not so great things happen in my past, but I wouldn't change any of them. And I wouldn't go back and like do it differently because I wouldn't have learned all the things that I've learned to this point. I wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be the person that I am today if I hadn't gone through all the things that I've gone through.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I hadn't gone through those things. Whereas I think a lot of people tend to give the like, oh my gosh, yes, I'd go back and change this and I wouldn't do that and I'd do blah, 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 like all the things that, they would change because they were a victim in that situation.
Well, and I think also that that leads to like people living in the past and that holding on to the shame, right? Which is that's a work of the enemy, right? That's not normal, right? Like the holding on to that shame is not normal and not something that people should do. And that's where you get a lot of that. But, I would agree. I mean, if you were to build like a repertoire of like first date questions, right? Or, I mean, to be honest with you, even if you've been married 15 years, right? Go
Yeah.
ask your partner these things,
Yeah.
right? Hey, would you go back and change the past if you could?
Mm. I
You
think
know,
that one's just a good indicator of personal growth in general.
right,
Because I think if you're actually growing, you're going to recognize, like, no, because I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't gone through all those things.
right. And then, also the would you learn from your previous, relationship or your past relationships, right? Um and there's a bunch of even I guess add-on questions or accent questions that you could throw in with that. But I think this is an important thing to like analyze and actually have a conversation with if you are dating with the person that you're dating, or if you've been married for a while, the person that you're married to. Because if you are married and you ask these questions and you realize, holy cow, like they didn't answer them the way that would indicate that they've let go of past, that they have grown, that they have all these things. It's not to say, hey, you know, throw out the relationship, throw out the kitchen sink kind of thing. No, like it would give you an indicator of like, man, maybe we need to work on this, right?
Yeah.
Because I would be willing to bet most people, if they actually audited themselves and asked themselves this question and were honest with themselves, right? Because as human nature, we want to make ourselves look and sound better than, what our deepest thoughts are, which then leads to not always being 100% honest with ourselves. But I think that if they were, they would realize that, man, I've got some growth to do.
Hmm.
I've got some stuff to work on. I mean, you and I have stuff to work on, right? And
Yeah.
that's, I think, an important thing to understand is that it's an ever growing process. But if you don't know and you're going through life or your relationship with like these blinders on and you're just staying in your lane and not actually examining things, you know, like that's an issue.
Yeah, for sure. I I don't know. They are just really good questions in general to examine for yourself. In the fact of like, am I actually growing or am I stuck on something? And if I'm stuck on something, why am I stuck there?
Hmm.
What do I need to do to move myself forward out of that place? What am I holding on to that I need to let go of? Because holding on to the past doesn't actually change anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
all it does is keep you stuck in these loops in your brain that hold you into a place that you don't want to be. And that's not to say like things might have like really sucked that you didn't like that happened, but why are you staying there? Is that helping you currently or pushing you forward into your future? Is that making you happy? Is that giving you joy? Is that doing anything for you besides keeping you stuck in a certain place? And if it's just keeping you stuck in a certain place with anger and resentment and whatever else it is, it's probably time to let that go. And I know that's hard for a lot of people because they're like, oh, but what if? Well, what if it happens again? Or what if this? Or what if that? Okay. Like, what if it does? Then you're going to get through it again, just like you did last time, and come out the other side and have learned something new.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, um, the other, while we're sitting here talking about this, I was thinking of another question too that you could throw in there, to audit yourself, but also, examine your partner. And that'd be, what do you plan to do differently now that you haven't done in your previous relationships?
Hmm.
You know? And that's kind of another red flag of like, if you go into some crap about, your ex versus your personal actions, it's a red flag.
Yeah, for sure. If it's always about your ex and what they did wrong, that's kind of an issue.
Yeah. I think that, like I said, I mean, the overall point though is there's a few questions that you need to be asking yourself and the other person, especially if you're in either a younger relationship or still dating. But this can also apply to longer term relationships, and really, coming to the fact of like, there's probably some work to do that you're ignoring. And these underlying things and how you view things and your internal conversation, internal viewpoint can have drastic effects for the positive or negative of your relationship.
Yeah. So what I was thinking that I lost and now finally my brain caught back up again was our conversation, like when something comes up that reminds us of the past, like you kind of brought it up earlier, but our conversation now looks like being like, hey, I didn't like the way that we handled this.
Mm-hmm.
It made me feel a certain way, and I don't want to feel like that. What can we do to change this and not do this again in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Versus like, you just sounded like this and I didn't like that and you need to change it. Like it's not our conversation about it is always like, hey, I felt a certain way, didn't like how that felt. It reminded me of feelings that I felt before, but I don't want to feel that way anymore. What can we do to move forward?
Right.
It's always a very like positive, what what can we do or what can I do to change how that went or, whatever the case may be. It's not like dwelling in the past. I felt something that felt like the past, but I don't want to do that. Let's figure out how we can change this for the future.
Progress.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to analyze these things in your relationship and in your life to be able to work on them, right? Because if you don't identify them and you have no idea they're there because you're living life in your relationship with those blinders, then you can't make changes. But that's, exactly it, is identifying like, okay, and those can be things that you can work on, or identifiers or markers of like, hey, this is an area I need to work on. Like you said, when you're feeling those things, right? And it's also important for your partner to really understand that when you are feeling these things, that's I guess, a moment that they can step up and actually lean into things and really create an area of connection, right?
Mhm.
Because in your relationship, any heightened emotional experience, right, is one of two things. It's going to be an opportunity for connection or an opportunity for disconnection.
Mhm.
And which way it goes is purely dependent upon how both parties handle that situation.
Yeah.
And the key is to continue to learn and understand and work on yourself so that you can take those heightened emotional experiences and actually handle them in a manner that's going to encourage connection, or at least discourage disconnection, right? At the very least, because that is, right? Like you can kind of land in the middle on some of these things, but more than likely, if it's discouraging, right? Because you have the best way I can put it is you have, it's like an investment, right? I mean, a relationship is just like a long-term investment. You're going to have ups and downs, but as those ups and downs come, it's supposed to work in a way in which long-term it continues to go up. And within that, on those ups and downs, these heightened emotional experiences are opportunities for you to create an up or a down, right? In
Mhm.
the moment. And the problem becomes when you start stacking too many downs, that's when you get a whole downward trend, right? On the whole relationship. But if you can at least keep it from going down,
Mhm.
right? Then it creates the encouragement for connection long term,
I
right?
mean, we can
Because
use ourselves as an example for this
oh,
this
for sure. I
past
mean,
week.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
exactly. And we've kind of had some ups and downs, but even like yesterday as an example, right? Like I'm sick, I don't feel well. I don't even remember like why we weren't agreeing. But it was, a situation where like we just kind of been at odds a little bit all day. And it kind of came to a head where you were feeling some type of way. I was feeling some type of way. And it started to go sideways in our communication. And that was where, at the end of the day, like, could it have been handled better? 100%. But by saying, hey, look, I was going to respond to that, but neither of us are in a place to hear right now. And my response is overly direct, which is not, sensitive to feelings or emotions, which is probably going to make this situation worse. So let's just take a break and, like, you know, I'll see you here shortly,
oh
because we
yeah.
were supposed to meet up. And at that point, it was kind of the situation of, did it create an area of connection? No. But did it discourage disconnection? Yes. Because it was catching that, hey, we're not hearing, this is going to continue to go not in the direction that we'd like it to, and stopping it and saying, okay, we're not going to create a situation of disconnection,
Mhm.
right? And then at that point, we met up. It was a quick exchange, anyways, because we both had other things we had to do, and we had about an hour or so that we were off doing different stuff. You were at kids sporting things. I was dealing with other kids, and uh, trying to get them fed dinner and all this stuff. And then when we came back together, it was a situation of working on reconnection, right? And had we continued to allow that situation to go drastically sideways and continued and actually created an area of disconnection, the whole night would have been different.
Well, I mean, we kind of did that for like a week recently, uh, where we just I don't like, we literally had the conversation and I was like, "I don't even know how it started." Like, I don't know what the, like, point of disconnect was, but we got a little bit disconnected, and then it just kind of snowballed into this downward effect of, like, almost us going backwards into, like, past ways of doing things. Like, you became avoidant and I became anxious because you were being avoidant, and then we literally had a conversation where it was like, I I felt afraid because you were pulling away, and you were pulling away because wasn't, whatever, and we were like, I think you were like, "I don't even, like, why are we doing this right now? This doesn't even make sense. This is stupid."
Mm-hmm.
And then that was, like, kind of snowballed into conversation about, like, actually fixing the problem, but I think that happens a lot where people get disconnected and then don't ever actually reconnect because 'cause they're not taking the time.
Well, but I think that this comes back to circling back, right? Because we're going to go back to where this conversation started
Yeah,
of
ownership and
ownership and
accountability.
your mindset, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're blaming your ex for everything they did wrong, and here's the difference, because most people, right, and this is where being honest with yourself comes into play, because a lot of people will say, oh, well, I own my part, but they were just still so bad, right? That's not owning your part.
Yeah.
You're lying to yourself. Stop, right? You know you're lying to yourself. It's easier to avoid yourself. Just stop. If you have true ownership, you're going to say, look, especially for the men, right? And here's back to, like I said, we have this conversation a lot where I'm harder on the men, or tend to be, but like that's because they're supposed to lead, right? And especially for men, if you're not owning your part, like your relationship went the way that it did because of your part in it, right? Because relationships don't fail when you have one party that is truly being who they're supposed to be and the other person isn't, and then it just fails, right? Because when you're in that place, there's this natural occurrence that happens where you just tend not to find each other,
Mhm.
right? And the last event I went to down in Arizona, that was a perfect example of that, right? Because in that event you were supposed to pick an accountability partner, but there was a process to it, right? And it was much like a dating process when you initially start dating somebody. And what's really interesting is every single person in the room, you're talking a few hundred people, found an accountability partner for the weekend that either was a past version of themselves
Mhm.
or was the missing piece of something they needed at that time.
Mhm.
And it was this really incredible situation in the way that it worked, because it was a simple, like seemingly silly question activity. And it just led you to this, right? Which is a lot like dating. And the thing about it is you're going to do the same thing, right? In the sense of, like, if you go on a couple dates with somebody and they're so far that bad, or even like a first date, if you're actually healed yourself from your past, you're standing in the energy that you're supposed to be, and you are actively seeking to be better, if that person's that bad, it's going to be such a turnoff. You're not going to go on a second date,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not just, oh, well, they were perfect and they confused me. This whole like, oh, they had me. I'll put the caveat out there because there's always the one person, right? There are people who are truly narcissistic or people who are sociopathic and stuff like that, that are truly, some crazy thing where you married them for 15 years and then they just were like a serial killer, burying bodies in your backyard or some crazy thing, right? But for 99% of relationships, that is not how it works. And if you feel this way, you're probably in the 99% and you're just not taking enough ownership.
I
Right.
mean, to be honest though, like even with the narcissistic relationships, like yes, your partner probably played a gigantic role in what happened, but you chose that partner.
That's
You need to take ownership in
right.
why
So there's
you
there's the ownership part, right?
yeah,
Of like, had you been who you were supposed to be, you wouldn't have been in the relationship,
yeah,
right? And that's where you have to own that. And you can make excuses or you can take ownership.
yeah,
Well, I didn't have the understanding. I didn't have the knowledge. I had this jacked up childhood.
yeah,
Okay, I hear you. Those are real things. But are those things the other person's fault?
right.
Right? Your jacked up childhood had nothing to do with your partner.
You
In the
didn't
in the sense that it will play into, because most
who
people that
you
had a jacked
choose.
up marriage or a
Yeah,
jacked up relationship for a long time was probably them choosing something based off of their jacked up childhood.
right.
But then there's the ownership piece of, had you consistently worked on yourself or sought the knowledge, and you can make all the excuses and say, well, I didn't know, or I was young, and stop, right? Like there's people that do it. There's people that have that understanding, right? And this is coming from somebody that I did screw it up for 15 years, right? Like, and played every, like, oh, well, I was young and this and that and da 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 and da. Like, it was on me.
Yeah.
I wasn't the person that I needed to be. I wasn't the person that I should have been, which ultimately led to the failure of my previous marriage and ultimately led to divorce. It ultimately led to who I chose. It ultimately led to the decisions I made. It ultimately led to who I was for many years,
Yeah.
right? But then taking the accountability and saying, okay, I screwed up. I can't necessarily fix everything that I've done, but what I can do is make sure that I don't make those same mistakes again,
Mhm.
right? Or I'm actively working and making an active effort in correcting those mistakes.
Yeah.
And it starts with those questions that we talked about, right?
Yeah.
Of, what did you learn from your previous relationship? Would you go back and change your past? You know, what are you choosing to do differently in this relationship or moving forward in relationships? Right. And those sort of things to say, well, I don't want the past, whether it's with the person that you're with now or, the next person that you're with. So I'm going to focus on me, who I am, and I'm going to change those things because it's going to allow me to choose better. It's going to allow me to handle situations better. It's going to allow me to communicate better, to connect better, to be the person and the partner that I should be. Because when you're striving to be the best partner you can be and not just checking boxes, right? Because that's a whole different conversation of like, if somebody's just checking boxes to try and be the right person, or like, no, this is who I am, so this is how I operate, right?
Yeah.
Then when you do those things and you're not just checking boxes, you stop living in this victim mentality, and those things change and you become a different person, the relationship you're in or the person you're with in the future changes, and you start realizing that it's not so much the other person and it's who you are. And until you can actually examine that, take that and actually make true change based on that, you're going to keep repeating the same cycles.
For sure. 100%. Which is why we talk about, needing to understand yourself and your past and why you do the things that you do. Because if you don't ever take ownership for those things, you literally will, for the rest of your life, repeat the exact same scenarios over and over and over again, just with potentially different people over and over again. But it's going to be the same scenario every time because you're not seeking out the person that is actually going to help you grow and be a better person. You're seeking out the same version of what you've already gone through because you don't want to change, and that's what you attract.
Yeah. Yeah. You attract what you see in the mirror.
Yeah.
In most cases, right? So like, and that's not the physical necessarily outward. I mean, that can be part of it, but typically it's who you actually see yourself as in the mirror, like that's what you're going to attract.
Also, what you think you deserve.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big one. Because if you think that you aren't deserving of something, whether you actually think it or subconsciously think it, because subconscious drives more than you think it does. And if you believe that you don't deserve someone better, then you're going to continue seeking the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a whole other topic for another time, I think. But
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we can go deeper into that, but then we're going to have a 2.5 hour podcast or a 4 hour podcast. And, people are going to probably fall asleep somewhere in the middle. So,
because I was even thinking about other stuff as you were just talking now, like talking about getting into relationships young, because I think that can be an
issue if you're not prepared, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that also tailors into the question that we got asked this week, which will be on the next podcast. How do you know it's the right time?
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, y'all go ask yourself the questions that we brought up multiple times. If you don't know the questions, then you weren't listening. So go back and listen again.
Go back and re-listen.
Yep. Go listen again and take those questions, audit yourself, or ask your partner and see where that leads.
Yep.
All right. Talk to you all next time.
Bye, guys.